A couple years ago, I got a Samsung Note 20, and unfortunately there were too many issues with that one, so I could never use that phone. Fast forward to now, and boom, we have a perfect condition Samsung Note 20 5G, a phone that I can finally say, yes, the reviewers were right. This phone sucks. Hello everyone, this is Matt from Real World Review, here with a phone that's a sequel from a phone that technically shouldn't have existed. Let's talk about it. Now you may be thinking, this is a dumb take. This is a phone smaller and cheaper than the Samsung Note 20 Ultra, and phones like the Samsung Note 10 prove that having two sizes is better, which I agree with. The issue is that the Note 10 was a 6.3-inch screen, and the 6.8-inch screen was on the Note 10 Plus, which both had 60Hz refresh rate. The Note 10 was smaller, however, at 5.94 inches tall, while this phone is 6.36 inches tall, or literally 0.03 inches shorter than the Samsung Note 10 Plus. Screen-wise, the Samsung Note 20 has a 6.7-inch 60Hz OLED panel, while the Samsung Note 20 Ultra has a 6.9-inch 120Hz OLED panel. So not only is it almost the same size, but it's a slower display for a launch price of $50 more than what the Samsung Note 10 was. This actually makes the Note 10 Plus's launch MSRP of $1,100 seem a little bit more sane. While this shouldn't matter, the issue is 2 months later, Samsung brought out this phone, the Samsung S20 FE, which features a slightly smaller 6.5-inch 120Hz OLED panel, but it was $300 cheaper for a larger battery and added an SD card with similar processor and camera performance. Sure, the Samsung Note 20 has a 6.7-inch 1080p flexible OLED panel with a 60Hz refresh rate, Gorilla Glass 5, the Snapdragon 865 Plus chip with 8GB of RAM and 128GB of non-expandable storage, and a 4,300 mAh battery cell that can be charged wired at 25 watts or 15 watts wireless with the option of reverse wireless charging if needed. These specs are good, with their screen refresh rate holding it back, and not only does the Samsung S20 Ultra clearly prove that, but even the Samsung S20 FE shows that the Note 20 is supposed to be inferior to all of them. While we do get Wi-Fi 6, an alleged IP68 dust and water resistance rating, as well as obvious Bluetooth S Pen support, we do not get an SD card slot, though it looks like it clearly could have been added. To be fair, the Samsung Note 10 didn't have SD card support either, but that one came with 256GB of storage standard, so there's that. As for the build, you know that it's glass on the front with a hole punch for the front camera, decent bezels, and a dodgy ultrasonic fingerprint scanner, but did you know that the back is plastic? While it is scratchable, breaking isn't really that much of a worry. I will say weight-wise that it does feel good in the hand, even though it is 192 grams. There is a metal area that holds the glass camera covers for those 3 cameras, as well as the flash and microphone. On the top, we get that aluminum band with the Fold 2 texture that houses the single or dual SIM slot, as well as another microphone. Do note that this phone does support eSIM. The left side has glossy metal, and that's it, while the right side is where the volume and power buttons are. While the bottom has the texturized metal again, another microphone, the USB-C 3.2 port, a loudspeaker that pairs with the earpiece to give you a stereo feel, and of course that coveted S Pen. One thing that I never use and most people forget about. It still features Bluetooth, but Samsung might have been right about removing it because I never use this thing. You might, in which this is great, and technically the only reason why you would buy a Note in the first place. Similar to the normal S20 series, the camera set is confusing, but I have a theory. My theory is that there is no 3x zoom, though it is advertised as a hybrid zoom. But first let's talk about the 10 megapixel focusable front camera that actually looks great, allowing for 4K 60 frames per second video, and well, it's good. It's a front camera, so what more do you need from it? Then the rear is a 12 megapixel ultra-wide camera, which is not focusable, but there were no focusable ultra-wide cameras for the 2 years of Notes that had ultra-wide cameras, and wasn't really standard until the S21 Ultra. You're limited to 4K 30 frames per second out of this camera, but that's okay for what it is, as the image looks good even if low light shows up. Then we have the 12 megapixel main camera, which is obviously focusable and has optical image stabilization as well as a great image. This was still a couple years away from Samsung getting rid of the 12 megapixel camera, but I don't really see an issue with it, even with a slight zoom. 4K 60 frames per second out of this camera, which makes me realize that there's actually 3 max video recording options, which is somewhat common, but generally the main camera does the highest video quality. That option was left for the 64 megapixel 3x telephoto camera sensor, which is actually a slightly larger camera sensor in megapixels and physical size compared to the main camera, but it seems like it's actually a 1.1x optical crop. This is evident when you put it in the 64 megapixel mode, as it clearly isn't a 3x zoom, which the 3x would technically be a hybrid zoom. It also shows when you put it in 8K 24 frames per second video mode, which doesn't really look that great, but has the 1.1x crop, at least that's what I estimate. The sensor is also optically stabilized and clearly focusable, and actually produces some great 3x shots, even though the camera switching happens at random zooming lengths, and technically the 3x shots are just double cameras and image processing magic. Man, remember when everything wasn't called AI? Regardless, I will say that the camera set on this phone doesn't let you down, which is nice given that it is supposed to be dwarfed by its better sibling, the Samsung Note20 Ultra, which has a 5x optical zoom and 108 megapixel mode, but ironically, a smaller camera sensor. Everything is great about this phone, but of course, there's always a but, because why else would you have an Ultra version of this phone? I feel like this phone killed the Note line. Like I was saying, the Note 10 was amazing, but the Note 20, there's too much money attached to a dramatically different phone, which made the Note 20 kind of pointless, and allowed the S21 Ultra to take the place of the Note series altogether. But when you use this phone, there really is one problem. The back is plastic and scratches easy, but it also makes it easier to do repairs on this phone, which I feel like is a win. The screen, for the most part, is flat, which is also a win. Internally, the phone is identical to the Ultra, with the exception of obviously the cameras and the 4300 mAh battery compared to the 4500 in the Ultra. It even comes with 5G ultra-wideband variants, unlike the Note 10, which was only a 4G phone. Speaking of the battery, it's fine, but this isn't really a good example since this phone has very few charge cycles compared to the average Note 20 that you would be buying, which will generally have 2+ years of usage, not barely 1 month like this one. When gaming and watching videos, the screen is great. Compared to the Samsung S20 FE, I actually preferred the Note 20's display, but the issue that I have is the refresh rate of 60 Hz. The problem is that most phones with 120Hz displays don't actually run at 120Hz all the time, but instead range from 60 to 90 to 120. The problem with 60Hz, well, it feels like they follow that trend, but they only hit 15, 30, or 60Hz at times. Those frame drops clearly aren't from the phone being bad, as the Samsung S20 FE does not experience this with its slightly tweaked down processor and 120Hz max refresh rate. Instead, this experiment shows that the screen's refresh rate actually ruins the phone's experience for me, and look, you may disagree, and that's perfectly fine. I'm sharing my opinion, you can have yours. But in this case, I wish that they would have gone with 120Hz display, but with 60Hz it feels like they don't want it to actually succeed. That way it fails and they have an excuse to cancel it. Kind of like how Apple will fix the back glass on your phone for $200, but then sell you the part for $199 for you to do it yourself, with the hopes that you'll get the credit back and send in your old part, all to save what, like $45? Just wait, they're going to kill the repair program saying that no one uses it, even though they're selling a less than $20 part for $155. Anyways, as for the pricing for the Note 20, it's fairly cheap, and the S20 FE seems like a better buy if you're not sold on that pen. But if you want to move up to the Note 20 Ultra, you might want to look at the S21 Ultra given the price, which supports an S Pen as well, but not a micro SD card slot. It also supports Android 15, while the Note 20, S20 FE, and the Note 20 Ultra only support Android 13 Max. So you get Android 15, but not a super slow micro SD card slot. The Samsung Note series was great. I feel like the Note 4 was an outstanding phone, the Note 5 was perfect ergonomically, the Note 7 was the most loved because no one was allowed to own one, and people loved the Note 8 and Note 9 because God knows why. If you gotta have a favorite Note, it should be the Note 20 Ultra, or the Note 10 Plus. I'll just say it, headset jacks aren't worth the hassle of having a super old phone. And that's my review of the Samsung Note 20, a good Note that was eclipsed by a better phone without a pen for a much cheaper price called the Samsung S20 FE. But what do you think? Let me know, and as always, join the 1%, and thanks for watching.